Couple of weeks ago, I filmed an unboxing video for Gloomhaven, one of the biggest and probably the heaviest game box in my collection. And I was very fascinated by the game. I didn't even know much about it, but from what I saw, I knew it was a legacy type of game. That is, with things that you discover, you go around, and you add things to the world of the story, you modify the components, etc., etc. So it has that sense of progressive revelation that is typical of fiction. In fiction, you start reading a book, a novel, watching a movie, you get the initial situation and you do not know what you'll find next. And part of the joy, the pleasure is precisely in discovering what's hidden in the later parts of the story. This was very hard to achieve in games. I mean, chess, the combinations may be almost endless, but there is not gonna be a third army that is gonna come in, and there are not gonna be surprises in terms of what is there. Only the combination of known elements. There are not gonna be unknown elements that are gonna be added to the story. So games have had a hard time traditionally mimicking that element of storytelling, which is so fascinating, until, well, some games in the 80s and the 70s did that, such as Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, actually probably is the first game that did that, and more recently we had legacy games, which are board games, so they are easier to play the role-playing games because you do not need a game master, a dungeon master, you do not need somebody who studies the story in advance, does all the preparation. If a board game can have that revelatory power, progressive revelation, the surprises and plot twists of storytelling without the previous preparation and with everybody playing together as a team, then that is great. Of course, you have the best of both worlds. You have the storytelling that is typical of role-playing games and fiction, and all of the advantages in terms of logistics of a board game that you can open, or you open a box, you play it, you put it back. You do not need all of the other work that a game master usually needs to do. So Gloomhaven belongs to this group, and it was very exciting because I like previous legacy games, and yet, as much as I love the system, it seemed to me that the system had not reached its full potential. And maybe it's the fact, again, that the idea of games that tell stories, that have plot twists, etc., etc., this idea emerged with Dungeons and Dragons. And then later, of course, we find it in endless other fantasy role-playing games. But to me, that is really the essence. To me, I wanted a fantasy game that had a adventure aspect, and that used the legacy system, pretty much Dungeons and Dragons as a board game. If nothing else, because I played Dungeons and Dragons for years, now I'm also playing Pathfinder, which is like playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I know how fun it is to be on a fantasy quest, and I really wanted to see that idea, which I know pays off bigly in terms of, I just said bigly, pays off bigly in terms of adventure and fun. So I wanted to see that applied to a system, the legacy system, that I know works for creating plots and stories, etc., etc. Gloomhaven seems to be precisely this, a legacy type of game where you're a fantasy adventure, you control a fantasy adventure, you travel the fantasy world, you discover new places, you go through a series of interlinked scenarios, you gain new equipment, you discover new facts and characters, etc., etc., etc. So it really seems to be a role-playing game in a board game form. Very excited to try it. I did. Now I'm gonna give you a general overview of the game, main concepts, etc., and then I'm gonna share some ideas with you. This is by necessity a first impression type of video because I played the game 4 times. I played 3 times with a friend and once solo. So I started exploring the scenarios, but there are like almost like 100 scenarios, so it will really take me a while before I'm gonna play them all, or most of them. So I'm gonna, start telling you what I think about the game after playing it for, well, a couple of hours, for for a pretty long game session. And then later probably I'll film another video in which I will tell you how my exploration and adventures in the world of Gloomhaven are going. But for now, let's take a closer look, and then we'll come back here and talk about the game more in general. This game has a lot a lot of components. I mean, look at the play area of the game with everything that I need out now that I'm playing the game. And I'm lucky because I have a gamer cave and I have a table where I can keep the game set up from session to session. I do not have to put everything back in the box and take it all down. I guess that if you have a good organization system, maybe it will not be too terrible. But, for example, look at all those monsters. Well, you want to keep them separated, so that simplifies finding them when you need them. A stack of terrain tile that you will use to form the tactical display areas for the players, etc., etc. Tokens, the scenario book, and then you see the map is folded. That is the strategic map where you see the area in which you're traveling. So, and that is the area where, of course, I will place the strategic map or the tactical map, whichever applies. So lots of components, lots of goodies, will take up quite a bit of space, and if you do not have dedicated space where you can keep the game in case you want to play a campaign, well, it may be a little bit of a pain to put back in the box and take out every time that you play. Each character in the game is represented by a miniature and by a card that you use to record the number of life points that will go down when the hero is wounded, up when the hero is healed, and the maximum and starting number of points depends on the level of the character. Here you have a track that you use to record number of experience points that the character acquires during a game. There are also other ways of acquiring experience points, and collecting experience points is how you level up, gain more life, gain new abilities, and so on and so forth. Here you have a reminder of the structure of the turn, basically just a player rate for that, and here the number of cards in your hand. And your hand of cards is pretty much a mini deck that you will use during the game to activate and perform actions. And you may be out of the game in one of two ways. Your health goes to 0, here on this track, or you're exhausted because all of your cards, or almost all of your cards, have been lost, not simply discarded, lost, and then you were not able to perform actions in the game anymore. The way it works, you will have cards that you will play. After you play them, you put them here in the discard pile. There are many indications here that suggest how to use the various sites of the player aid. Some cards may be active, may have lasting effects. I just so happen not to have any in here, in which case, however, oh, there you go, you put them up there. And some cards in the discard pile you can recover, but some cards are lost forever, at least for the current game, and then you place them there. The basic idea is this. As you can see, cards are divided in two areas, a bottom and a top area. At the beginning of each turn, you select two cards indicating the actions that you're planning to perform, and you put them face down there. With multiple players, you can agree in general terms, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but you cannot give technical details. You cannot say, I'm going to move 2 areas, and I'm going to use this or that, I'm going to have an attack that does that amount of damage, etc., etc., etc. So these characters have a number here, which is the initiative number, and the card that they put on top indicates the initiative number that they actually want to use. Once our players have committed to the 2 actions that they want to perform this turn and the initiative number, they'll flip them up, and then actions are resolved in ascending order from lowest to highest. Also, however, monsters have their initiative values, so for each type of monster that is in the game, you will need to draw an initiative card from their deck. Suppose that we have living bones and archers in this game. These are the only 2 monsters on the board. Then after we see what our initiative is, we draw a card from them, and that also gives us an initiative number for each type. So now I'll activate with a 28, and then they will activate. All the archers on the board will activate, then all the living bones will activate, and then all of the characters that have more than 45 in their initiative will activate. So that determines the order in which heroes and enemies act. When it is your time to act, you simply will use the actions depicted on your card, and you can use the bottom action of a card and the top action of the other. You cannot use 2 bottom actions or 2 top actions. And Very often that makes sense. Very often the attacks are on top and movement and other abilities that are not attacks are at the bottom. So for example here it would be a nice combo for me to move by up to 4 spaces and then to attack up to 2 enemies. I would be here, the template tells me where, with a strength of 4, and if there is a certain energy that is available and I decide to consume it, then I also get an extra attack and I get an experience point. That number there indicates experience points. This is really the basic idea. This is the basic idea of the game. So for example, we have an area in which we're playing monsters that are placed on the board according to scenario instructions, and monsters may be regular, in which case they have a white base, or elite, in which case they have a yellow base. Also, monsters have a card, or actually they have several cards, and each card has several orientations indicating the type of level, the level of the monster. If all of my characters are level 1, probably I want to fight against monsters that are level 1, so that the adventure is still interesting, it's not too easy, not too hard. But then as the game progresses, you change the orientation to show versions of the same monster that have better stats and are more deadly. For example, these are level 3, living bones, level 5, and so on and so forth. Very smart. And in each configuration, for each level of the monsters, there are 2 versions. On the left, the regular version, and on the right, the elite version. So that tells me the basic stats of the monsters that I will have to fight. That tells me they have special abilities. For example, they're able to target multiple players, if they have a defensive ability, but their basic stats that they all have are health points. I'm trying to reduce those to 0, so I kill them. Speed, how many spaces they can move, the strength of their attack, and whether or not they have a range attack. They don't, and in which case what the range is. You see also how the sleeve in which you place these cards is divided in various areas. This is very smart because this is what you use to keep track of hits that have wounded, debilitated the enemy but not killed it. It takes me 5 points to kill one of these skeletons, and suppose that here I have attacked skeleton number, where is it? Suppose I have attacked skeleton number 5, and I want to give damage to that one, then I place, and I gave you 3 points of damage, then I put 3 points of damage there. Then if I continues, there is another skeleton that is marked as 2, or as 2. As you can see, each opponent is marked with a number. Then I gave him 2 points of damage and I put them here. So it's a very smart way to keep track of the partial damage that you assign to monsters without having to keep, like in so many other games, the wound tokens directly next to the figure on the board, and then you have to move it around every time that the figure moves, etc. Much cleaner, much nicer. I think this may be the new standard. I hope that we're going to see a lot more of this applied to things. So, it's as simple as that. When it's your turn, you activate your actions, which are, again, very often to move on the board. Then you can execute an attack if your action allows you to. Some attacks are melee, so you need to be adjacent. Some attacks have a range. I talked, I believe, about energy, such as this one. There are game effects that will infuse the battlefield with mystical energy, and there are several types of energies, and you record the amount of available energy for the present time by using these tokens. Suppose that I use a game effect that makes the leaf energy very strong, and another game effect that makes the fire very strong. Then if I have cards that require the expenditure of the type of energy, then I simply reduce the level of energy in that category and I'm able to activate that effect, which very often is an improvement on what is already good. So for example, here I have an attack of 4. If I use the green energy, then the attack is +1. Fighting is super simple. The attack simply gives the number of damage points that I give to the opponent. That may be reduced by abilities, by special circumstances, game effects, shield effects, etc. But the idea remains, I determine how much I give them, also applying modifiers that may come from my own weapons, etc. I apply that, I subtract it, and if they go down to 0, they are dead. Now, as for the activation of the enemies, as I said, you will draw cards that will tell you when they activate, but it'll also tell you what they do. When they activate, the enemies will follow the list of orders that they have here, top to bottom. So these guys first will move, and then they will attack. They will move to try to reach enemies. The enemies are us, and then attack. Other orders may be different. For example, here they will attack without moving, etc., etc. Here they will use a protection and heal themselves, etc. You also see modifiers. Those are modifiers that you apply to the stats that you find here. So, for example, if now I'm resolving this card, the monsters will move, the skeletons will move without modification to their speed, so they will move by 3 if it's a regular skeleton, and then will attack me without modification to the strength, so it will be an attack of 1. So various modifiers there. Now, the game as written, as far as I understand, in the game as written, the card that you draw to determine initiative is also the card that you draw to resolve actions. So now I know at a certain point during the turn that the skeletons will activate when 45 comes up as an initiative number. And I also know that all skeletons on the board, no matter where they are, will move and then attack, and I know exactly by how much. I'm not too fond of that idea. I think it's fine, but it seems to me a little artificial that all of the elements, all of the enemies of one type, no matter where they are, they act exactly in the same way. And I know exactly what they're trying to do. So actually, the way we play it is a little bit of a variant, but I recommend you try because it's so much fun. We draw a card for initiative as usual. Then when it comes the time in the turn for the certain group to activate based on their initiative, then we indicate one of them, and we draw a new card for each of them. Now we activate that guy. Well, this symbol here means that the deck needs to be reshuffled. This symbol here. Shuffle, 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 shuffle. I activate this guy. Now then I activate this guy who will move and attack and also will target an enemy with all attacks. And then another will do something different. Maybe another one will move differently, another one will heal himself, etc., etc., etc. I like the fact of drawing individual cards, a card for initiative, but when it's time to resolve the initiative, to draw an individual card for each enemy, so that they act differently and there are surprises and they do different things. I find that's how we play it, and that's how you're gonna play it if you play it with me. That's because that's the way I like it. These are some of the basic ideas. Oh, actually, I forgot something super important about combat, as I said. Yes, this is the attack, but when you have the attack number indicated by your card, and say you use several modifiers, there's a very important one which comes from your combat deck. As you can see, it's a deck of cards that, well, they apply modifiers. And they may be positive, negative, maybe automatic failure, maybe a multiplier, usually very powerful, etc., etc. You start with a generic deck of cards, and actually precisely through this deck of cards, you improve over levels, meaning that when you acquire new abilities, you will be allowed to add personal cards to the deck. That may give you special abilities. For example, this card has an immobilize effect. Better bonuses, there may be advantages that allow you to remove cards that are not good. So basically, as your level advances, yes, you gain experience points, you acquire new stuff, but you also will get to manipulate the composition of your combat deck, which will give you better modifiers. But the overall idea still remains the attack given to you by the card, all modifiers, one of them will be a card that you will draw from this deck, and apply the resulting damage to the opponent. And this is for the tactical, for a very general introduction of the tactical aspect of the game. Each scenario is introduced in the scenario book, and there is just an irresponsible number. Irresponsible because, I don't know, I see how people may get addicted to playing this game like they used to, with online video games back in the day, and just, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. And the scenarios are connected to one another narratively, meaning that you can play them as one-shot scenarios, and then you're missing on the best thing of the game, which is to explore this fantasy world and see how the scenarios are intertwined in a larger narrative. So if you decide not to play them individually, you want to play the campaign, you start from the first scenario, and that will unlock other scenarios. During the scenario, you will receive instructions that will give you information on which other scenarios become available and which other locations become available. Like in pure legacy tradition, you will be able to alter the board. This is the map that represents the area that we're exploring with the city of Gloomhaven there magnified. And as you can see, as I played several scenarios, I got to discover new locations. So there are stickers that you apply on the board. When you discover a new location, you mark a dot when you explore the location, when you play the scenario associated with that location. So great freedom, and these scenarios really are connected narratively. You go to a place not just to loot it, but because maybe you want to discover something about a character that was mentioned in a previous scenario, and so on and so forth. The narrative aspect is strong and definitely very, very interesting. Also, there's an area here for stickers that you will attach when you acquire achievements. There's a prosperity track. Your actions may bring prosperity to the city of Gloomhaven. Maybe you have helped a merchant. Maybe you've done something that has pacified the city. So you gain prosperity points, and you color the squares in this track here, and when you reach one of these numbers, then you get an advantage because there will be more items available in Gloomhaven for you to purchase between adventures. You will be able to create new characters directly at that level. The prosperity level is a 3, then I can create level 3 characters in Gloomhaven. And going and traveling around the map and doing the campaign thing also has its own joys. If you're playing in the campaign scenario, then when you travel, you will need to read a road card, which are sort of mini choose your own adventure situations, because there is a situation described on top, 2 options given, and then on the back, you have the results. So you read the situation, you think what you would like to do in that situation, and then you see what the effects are based on the options you select. And when you go to town, similarly, you have city cards that have the same structure. Resources, people that you meet, pretty much what you would expect a GM to do in a role-playing game, to describe the place in which the situation is happening, to give you extra characters, a flavor, to flesh out the environment, and that is all handled that way. Then you have items that you can purchase in town. There is a modest number of items that you can purchase at the beginning of the game, and there is a much bigger deck of cards that, as of now, I don't know what they do. I haven't been instructed about them yet, but some will become available as the prosperity level increases. So a lot of upgrades, a lot of other things that you can add to your characters. And of course, it is fun to level up your characters and to buy them new gear, new equipment. When you go to town after an adventure, you will have gold, hopefully, and you will spend it to purchase items. Basically, what you have here is concepts that you have seen in role-playing games and even in board games inspired by role-playing games, but what I had not seen before was this deep level of commitment to giving you the experience of a role-playing game through a board game. This really feels like playing a role-playing game without a master and through the mechanics of a board game only. Again, many board games have tried to do so, but this one does it in a way that I hadn't seen before. Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh my gosh, I love Gloomhaven. This is more than a game, it's a place where I want to go to live. It really does what I hoped a game one day would do, which is to give me an incredibly immersive experience, to give me a setting that's not just a space like a chessboard, which is a space to organize the pieces, but it really feels like a parallel world that I am mentally, magically inhabiting through the figure of the avatar. pretty much when you have pretty much something similar to like a massive multiplayer online role-playing game without having all of the trouble of having all the stuff that you need to do to to play those games. You have to describe, etc. You need a computer, and I already stare into a computer for so many hours every day. And then I want my hobbies to be mainly unplugged. So all of the things that you have in that type of video games, you're exploring a new world, discovering new places, etc., etc., and that you have in a role-playing game, same idea. Finally, we can have them in a board game, really with the joy, the fun of discovery and exploration. To me, that is the beauty of Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, and other video games that have an adventure element, the idea of exploring a new, mysterious, fascinating place, which is full of danger, full of challenges, monsters to slay, and treasure to loot. What's not to love? To me, that is the recipe of some of my favorite games. Also happens to be the recipe of some fiction that I like very much, because that's a kind of plot that I really enjoy when I read about it in books. And now I can play it in a board game. And I played a lot of board games in the past, with, for example, Introduction to Dungeons and Dragons in board game form, in which you had like some 10, 12 scenarios, and you moved around the board, etc., etc. Games like Hero Quest. So Dungeons and Dragons, or Dungeons and Dragons type of game in a board game form, is not a new idea at all. Actually, there have been a lot of games of that type. If anything, I was almost wondering, do we need one more? But then, when the legacy games started coming out, I thought, yes, we need at some point somebody to apply this idea to a Dungeons and Dragons type of experience. And that has happened, and it has been done beautifully, amazingly. I had such a blast playing this game. I really felt lost in the world of the story. I really felt what the game was trying to do, which is to draw me in, to give me the sense as I was playing at the tactical level that there was an intense fight with a lot of interesting effects, maneuvers, etc., etc. And then to have a context that has a high narrative value, that glues the scenarios together and really gives me the illusion, it's an illusion, it's a beautiful one, it's a very effective one, the illusion of a tight world, a world with no gaps, a world where stuff keeps happening between scenarios. When I put the pieces back in the box or on the table waiting for the next scenario, I had the impression that these characters are still doing stuff somewhere out there, waiting for me to connect again. The fact that between dungeons, and not all the boards, not all the tactical confrontations happen in dungeons, but between those battles, then there's something happens on the road, because you draw cards to determine what happens. Then you go to the city. Again, it's not just a checklist of things that you can buy, etc., etc., but there will be events that happen. And some of those events have their own challenges. Maybe you discover from their information about other locations on the map that you wouldn't be able to unlock otherwise. All sorts of crazy stuff can happen. You really have, when you go to the city, the joy and the surprise that you would have if you were playing a role-playing game and you do not know at all what the game master is going to throw at you. And a good game master will create a large variety of adventures, and here you do have a huge variety of situations and things that may happen. So you really have the sense of a tight world, because you have the tactical confrontation, then you travel to the city. In the city, stuff happens, and you travel to another place, you look at the map, you discover new places. It really feels tight. The fabric of the fictional reality of the game is one that has no holes in it, and it feels really tight. I love that. There was another game that did something like this, of course, Shadows of Brimstone, and I also have sung the praises of Shadows of Brimstone as much as I've been able to, because that's a fantastic game that has the same idea. Here we have a game that is similar in that sense, but also has the legacy element. There is more stuff that you discover as the game progresses, rather than a campaign that from that point of view is a little more traditional. So to me, Gloomhaven is something else. It's more than a game. It really is an experience. It is a virtual world. It is a portal on a fictional reality that I just can't wait to keep exploring. But I needed to share this with you so that if you're able to track down a copy, well, do so because the game is absolutely phenomenal from the point of view again of the immersive narrative experience. To be a little more technical, mechanically the game works. It's a smart game system, diceless system, but really smart idea with the cards that you can manipulate. For example, as you level up, you can get more cards or different cards in your action deck, and you manipulate your combat deck. So you customize your character, you try different combinations, your character can do different things. I like the fact that you can pull off interesting combos by putting down cards. And I like the fact how the resource management works. Now, in a sense, maybe thematically, there are moments in which I feel like, well, my hero's been in the dungeon, probably this battle looks like in the time of the story has been, the battle's been going on for like 20 minutes. And my guy's exhausted. So it feels like you have these like really high energy characters that enter the dungeon or wherever the place is, and then they get exhausted really fast. But mechanically, game-wise, it works very well, and it doesn't really affect the immersive experience all that much, if at all. But I really like the trade-off here because you have some powerful actions that if you use them, you lose the card immediately. It doesn't go in your discard pile from which you can get it back. You get it in your... You put in the lost card. Oh yes, in the lost card section. This is really the key idea, that you can also choose to rest, in which case you do get the cards back from the discard pile, but one. So one, every time that you take a rest, you take the cards from your discard pile, but there's a card from there that doesn't go back into your hand, goes in your discard in your lost section, and is out for the game. So between the cards that you choose to activate for the powerful effect that causes them to be lost, the fact that you will lose some cards every time that you get them back from resting, of course, your deck becomes narrower and narrower, and that really creates interesting situations, because of course you had to choose what ability you retain for longer, and other ones that you have to get rid of. You choose which combos of actions you want to use. So from the point of view of resource management, from a strictly gameplay point of view, it's a great idea. And also from the point of view of simply the psychological involvement, it does create a lot of tension because, well, you really had the sense that the clock is ticking, that you only have that much time. It really creates a nice countdown that makes the experience fun and interesting. The scenarios that I've seen so far have all been very interesting, very fun. I'm not going to talk about the difficulty level because there are just so many ways that you can tweak it and change it that I don't want to hear anybody complain the game is too easy or too hard, because if you complain about that, there is something that you're not getting, that you can just get the game at exactly the level of difficulty that you want. So very flexible. There's just so much stuff that you can do. Again, customization. Like in a role-playing game, the fact that you should be able to do a lot of things the way you want in a role-playing game is something that you find here in the way you can manipulate the level of the monsters, the level of difficulty, customize your characters, and so on and so forth. It's a great game. It is something else. I haven't been this fascinated, this drawn in by a game in a long time. Gloomhaven, well, my large game table in my gamer cave is gonna be occupied for a while. I'm playing other games now in another table, and the table in our dining room, because the table in the gamer cave is gonna be devoted to Gloomhaven for quite a while. I'll report about Gloomhaven later after I play the game more, but for now I can tell you this game is truly spectacular. It really is something else.